What's up guys, welcome to the fourth tutorial in our Python language basics. Here we're going to focus on type conversion. This is conversing back and forth between variable types, and we're going to launch straight into some examples. Now we'll start by talking about some specific examples of conversing between different variable types. We'll go over kind of what is and isn't allowed, because for the most part these conversions make sense, but sometimes they're just plain weird. So that's where these kind of interesting tricks, I'm not sure tricks is the right word, maybe subtle nuances that are built into Python come into play. So let's head on over there now, and we can kind of continue on where we left off last time. As you can see, I've just added some small annotations, and let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so we'll want a new cell here. Just going to zoom in so you guys can read it a little more easily. And seeing as we have variables of all types, I figure we can kind of go from here. So we have some bools, ints, floats, and strings. I think actually we converted that int to a string just for that demonstration. So the first thing we want to do is just convert that back to an integer. Okay, cool. So what I figured we'd do is we would print out the corresponding value of these types after their conversion. Now, I don't think there's much point demonstrating converting stuff to a string. You know what? Why not? We'll go ahead and do that anyway. Basically, to convert anything to a string, you just do string like this, and then what you want to convert to a string. Okay, so let's say, for example, I want to convert my number of lives to a string, and I want to print that out. Okay, I can do that. That's no problem. And it just prints out 5. So this looks exactly the same as if I just printed out 5, but this is a string type. So for example, if I printed out the type of this, okay, then you should see a string. Okay, so it starts out as an integer. Now we're basically converting that to a string. Now one of the big differences here between me doing this and then doing this, number of lives is equal to 5, is that number of lives remains unchanged. Okay, so just to demonstrate that, I'll do something like this. We'll do string num lives is going to be equal to basically this. Okay, and then I'm going to print out the type of number of lives. Okay, and then I'm going to print out the type of string number of lives. Like that. Okay, so one's an integer and one's a string, even though when I print them out, they both look the same. Okay, and that is because this conversion here is converting the value stored here and storing it in this new variable. Okay, so it's actually leaving the number of lives untouched. Okay, number of lives is still an integer. It's basically taking whatever value it finds here, converting that to a string, and then storing that back into the string number of lives. Okay, so that's really the difference between that and if I did number of lives is equal to 5, because this right here is changing whatever value is stored in this variable. Okay, so if then I did that, they should both be strings. Okay, so hopefully you can kind of understand the difference there. I'm actually going to comment that out, and we'll continue on with that. Okay, so just make it known that anything can be converted to a string. Again, you just do string and then whatever we want. Booleans, ints, floats, other strings for whatever reason. But yeah, it just basically prints out the exact string translation. So converting to a string isn't particularly interesting. Let's focus on the others. What about converting to a Boolean? Now this is where things get really weird, because basically a 0 in kind of terms of a Boolean is considered a false, and a 1 is considered a true. Okay, so that's typical binary. 1 is kind of on, or it's true, and 0 is off, or it's false. Okay, so that makes sense. If we do a 1, it's true, 0, it's a false. But outside of that, everything else evaluates to true somehow. Okay, so even if we're converting some random string to a Boolean, it'll be true. Even if we're converting 0.1 to a Boolean, it's true. Okay, anything other than the exact value of 0 is false. It's true rather. Okay, 0 is a false, everything else is true. Okay, so let's go ahead and print out an example of that. So if I print out the Boolean conversion of a 0, okay, and then I print out the Boolean conversion of a 1, okay, and we'll just demonstrate that. We should get false and true. So that does make sense, actually. A lot of languages will kind of perform a similar process. What if I do a 2? Okay, again, that's true. What if I do a 0.1? Okay, that's still a true. Even though there's a 0, it's still considered a true. Okay, same with if I did some kind of a string. So I can put whatever string I want in here. Okay, And that's also going to evaluate to true. All right, so anything that is not exactly a 0, when converted to a Boolean, will give true, otherwise we're given false. Okay, so what about converting stuff to integers? Now, well, I shouldn't say most, some conversions are allowed. Actually, most conversions are not allowed. So let's take some random string, okay, and I'll convert it to an int. And let's say I want to convert, again, just some random string to an integer. And let's see what happens there. Okay, now this is not even giving me some unexpected value. This is actually crashing my whole program. Okay, and that's because it's saying we don't know how to convert this to an integer. Okay, it's kind of interesting that this occurs, because in a lot of languages, these would also give crashes. If it's not a 0 or a 1 or a true or false, then there's something wrong there. But in Python, it allows that, but it doesn't allow this, okay? Because it's just so far from what makes sense that it says we don't know what to do with it, we're going to crash the program, okay? However, if I did, I guess I should comment that out because it's not allowed. If I did an integer of a string that's like a 1 or something, okay, that's totally fine. So as long as I have numbers in here, that's okay. As soon as I have something else weird, that doesn't really work so much, okay? I can also convert a float to an integer. So let's say I did a 0.5. I can do that. And in this case, it'll just give me a 0. So essentially, it doesn't round up. It just chops off the decimal place and gives whatever whole number I have here. Okay, it just gets rid of that. Gives the whole number. I know some languages will round up or down accordingly, but not the case with Python. All right. And let's see if I try to do like an integer of a false literal value. Okay, let's just get rid of that. We actually get a 0. So that does make sense. Same with if we did a true, then that should give us a 1. Okay, just like converting between numbers and booleans, booleans and numbers, it kind of gives a similar sort of thing. Okay, so ints do make sense for the most part. Again, we can do string representations of numbers, but we cannot do string representations of anything else. All right, so finally on to floats. I don't think there's a whole lot more to say about floats. I guess we can actually just kind of run these in the same cells as the integers, because for the most part it kind of works out to be, you know what, actually we'll do a new cell. It kind of works out to be the same stuff. I guess we can just kind of run through some examples of these, but converted to floats. So we'll just replace the int with a float there, and we can go ahead and print out the results and see what we get there. Okay, so we get 1.0. Note that it does actually add the decimal number. If we're converting anything to a float, even if it's a whole number, actually I guess this, let's try a whole number, let's try a 5. It should stick a 0.0 on the end of it. Okay, same with the booleans, false and true. It is still giving us a 0 and 1, but it will always stick a 0.0 onto the end of it. That's kind of Python's way of letting us know that, yes, we're dealing with a float and not an integer, and we need to make that distinction. Okay, so that is actually pretty much all I wanted to cover there. There were just a couple of weird points that, especially if you're coming from other languages, are different in Python, some things that do and don't make sense. For example, the first time, I guess when I was just starting out with Python, this whole idea of converting strings into booleans that are not true or false. Well, actually, you know what? I never demonstrated this. If we convert boolean of, let's say we want to convert this, okay? That still evaluates to true. Even though this is clearly false, it still gives true. So there were a couple things in the Boolean side of things that really didn't make much sense. This kind of trying to convert text, letters, and other characters to numbers also makes sense. But I'm not sure if that's necessarily intuitive or not. Either way, I just wanted to kind of highlight what is and isn't allowed. Remember, with each of these conversions, doesn't matter what type, or rather from what type or to what type, we're actually not modifying the original variable's value. Okay? All we're doing there is taking whatever value we hold, converting it and storing it in a new variable, or in our case, we were simply printing it out. So the original variable or the original value remains unchanged. Okay, that is different from reassigning a different type of variable. All right, so keep that in mind. In the next section, we're going to be talking about operations. I think we've got some slides on that, so we can talk about what operations we'll be using and how we'll be using them. Once we're familiar with that, then we can do the same thing, turn to the code for some examples. Okay, so thanks for watching. We'll see you guys in the next one.